For a month now, protests have rocked the country, which have left more than 20 people dead and thousands injured. The unrest began over a hike in metro fares, but quickly spun out of control, devolving into riots and looting, kneecapping the economy along the way. As a result, the government promised to draft a new constitution to replace the current one. President Sebastian Pinera also admitted that security forces had met the demonstrators with excess force. Now, Chile is considered one of Latin America's strongest economies. Growth this year is likely to be around 2.5%, but inequality is a huge problem. Just 1% of the population holds nearly a quarter of the country's wealth, while the bottom half collectively just owns 2%, and they have very little chance of escaping poverty. Now, for more on the story, let's bring in Amalendu Misra from Lancaster University. Good morning, Amalendu. Good to have you on the program. Chile had long been labeled as an economic success story, yet there is this widespread inequality that we've talked about. Tell us more about the root of this problem.
That we have at the moment, the 1990s, when the constitution disadvantaged a massive portion of the country's population, and that has been going on for the last almost quarter of a century. What we have seen is that the problem of the middle class, it is an aspirational middle class. Imagine going to a shopping mall. Imagine being surrounded by fancy restaurants, but you don't have the money in your wallet to go and buy things or to have a lunch there in these fancy restaurants. So that is exactly what is happening in Chile. Although we have a middle class, it simply doesn't have the purchasing power. And as you rightly put it in your report earlier, the country's richest 1% receives 33% of the country's income. So they have access to all the goodies, whereas the rest of the population doesn't. So that creates a massive amount of unrest.
Now, Amalendu, the government has promised a constitutional overhaul. Is this the way out of this crisis?
Not necessarily, because what we have seen here is that a neoliberal policy, economic policy, which has kind of structurally disadvantaged a massive portion of the population. Unless and until we address that, just having a constitutional change doesn't go very far. Let's say, for example, two different sectors here. One is education and the other one is healthcare. So if the country doesn't invest in that, if the country doesn't open up those two sectors to the middle class, the rising underclass, so to speak, then the constitutional reform is not going to go very far.
Do you see any chances of that happening, these sectors being opened up?
No, what has happened here is that exactly what we have in Mexico, because the rich grow richer and the poor grow poorer. And that is exactly what is happening in Chile. It is a success story, yes, but it is a success story only for a specific section of the society. If you look at the OECD figures, Chile sits at the bottom in terms of economic disparity, the gap that we talked about earlier. So unless and until we address the specific structural readjustment, then the discontent is going to continue, and whatever kind of window dressing we are going to do through this constitutional reform is not going to address the real questions at the ground level.
Amalendu Misra from Lancaster University, thank you for your thoughts.